Our first speaker is Ms. Fabregas, Director of the Recovery and Resilience Task Force at the European Commission. She will provide insight into the ongoing implementation of the recovery and resilience plans by all member states. Our expertise will help us understand the necessary steps for successful implementation by 2026. Our second speaker is Mr. Damin, State Secretary for Recovery, Strategic Investments, responsible for science policy in the Belgian government. He will discuss Belgium's transition from recovery to addressing energy independence and sustainability, focusing on the Repower EU project, driving the country decarbonization process. Given the progress made by some countries, the challenges faced by others, and the urgency to address key reforms, this presentation promises to be both enlightening and thought-provoking. We extend our sincere gratitude to our speakers for joining us today. Their valuable insight will contribute to our collective understanding of the path toward a resilient and sustainable Europe. After the presentation, you will have the opportunity to ask questions and engage with our speakers. One of my colleagues will be standing by with the microphone, so you will have time to speak with them. Now, without further ado, Ms. Fabregas, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Thank you for this very nice introduction of the topic. So I'm in charge of 12 member states, of the recovery and resilience plans of 12 member states, and I wanted to present to you today a state of play of the implementation, not only of the 12, but of the 27 member states. So just as a reminder, Recovery and Resilience Facility is a new instrument, a so-called performance-based instrument that implies a big envelope of money from the EU, the biggest program the EU ever has brought forward, that is divided on grants and loans, and in which the regulation setting up this Recovery and Resilience Facility established a formula in order to decide which was the envelope allocated for each member state. And this envelope, of course, also was revised last year. So each member state has to present a plan. So the ownership remains on the side of the member state, including reforms and investments. And these reforms and investments have to have a lasting impact, have to address the country-specific recommendations that the European Commission proposes and the Council of the Union endorses in the framework of the European semester. And these measures have to contribute to the 6 pillars of the facility. And these pillars are green transition, for which a minimum of 37% of investments in each individual plan have to be allocated to that pillar. Digital transformation, here the minimum requirement per each plan is 20%. Third pillar is social and territorial cohesion. Fourth, smart, sustainable, and inclusive growth. Fifth, health, economic, social, and institutional resilience. And the sixth, and very important one, is policies for the next generation. So as you see, it's an overall coverage of all EU policies. In addition, none of the measures in the plan can harm the environment. It's what we call the do no significant harm principle. And all the member states have agreed on a path concerning the implementation of these reforms and investments. And is the performance in implementing these milestones and targets towards the achievement of the reforms and investments that allow the member states to request payments concerning their performance in implementing these reforms and investments. Just to highlight that as we are talking about EU funding, there is also a strict condition for the member state to have in place solid audit and control systems in order to ensure the financial interest of the European Union is well protected. So the implementation of the Recovery and Resilience Facility started early 2021. And since then, the Council has already adopted the plans of the 27 member states. So we have received payment requests by several member states, amounting to 25 already payment requests. 3 are still under assessment. And the European Commission has already disbursed 153 billion to the different member states. In concept of pre-financing, because there was a 13% pre-financing that was allocated to all the member states that submitted plans in 2021, but also to the implementation, linked to the implementation of the recovery and resilience plans. So it was kind of, as highlighted on the slide, that the EU economy closed the gap with its pre-pandemic output levels in summer 2021, thanks also to the impetus that the EU recovery and resilience plans was bringing forward. Important to say that the funding of the recovery and resilience facility is making the EU one of the largest issuers of euro-denominated bonds. So in 2022, the EU gross issuance reached 119 billion in long-term instruments. And to highlight also that around 30% of the issuance are green bonds. And this is linked to the specific green type of investments that we have in the plans that I will mention later. To highlight the reforms, just to say that 1/3 of all the measures in the 27 plans relate to reforms. And these reforms are very important because they are structural reforms and they will have a long-lasting impact. And of course, they are in order to address the country-specific recommendations. And in terms of overall envelope, and now I will develop this a bit more in the following slides. So we see that despite the fact that there was a 37% minimum investment on green, we have reached 41%. On digital, the minimum was 20%. We have reached 26%. And on social expenditure, where there was no threshold, we are reaching around 30%. So here you see in these slides the state of play of implementation. First row, 27 plans adopted by the Council. Second row relates to pre-financing, which was linked to the plans that were adopted in 2021. So Belgium received pre-financing. Then we have here the 28 payment requests that have been submitted. As you can see, some member states have already submitted 3. So it's Greece, Spain, and Italy. The Commission has disbursed 25 of this funding for the payment request. And now we are entering in a phase of amending some the plans. Actually, all plans will be amended because all plans have to introduce a REPowerEU chapter. I will develop this later. So here you see speed of disbursement, taking into consideration member states. As you can see, Sweden, Poland, Netherlands, Ireland, and Hungary have received no funding at all yet because they were not even entitled to the pre-financing as their plans were adopted after 2021. And then we see Germany, Finland, Estonia, and Belgium that have received only the pre-financing. So they have not yet submitted a payment request, but other member states are already on the side of payment requests being disbursed. So picture of the green transition. So as I highlighted, 30% was the minimum, but we have reached 41 or 42%, depending on how, whether we take into consideration measures that relate not only to climate, but also to environmental investments. In terms of investments, you can see that it's mainly on sustainable mobility and on renovation and energy efficiency, but also there are lots of investments on renewables, biodiversity, circular economy, and research, development, and innovation. But as highlighted before, what is really key in the Recovery and Resilience Facility is that it's not only investments that we are asking member states to introduce in their plans, it's also reforms. And these reforms are key. No? So we see in several member states reforms linked to the green transition, for instance, tax reforms promoting clean mobility, also reforms to facilitate deployment of renewables, the water and waste management, nature conservation, also reforms on circular economy, and also reforms on permitting and environmental taxation. If we move to the digital, so as highlighted before, the minimum was 20%, we reached a 26% in the overall calculation of the 27 plans. Here we see investments on fixed and 5G connectivity infrastructure, also on digitalization of public administration in all areas, from judicial to health administration, digitalization of businesses, in particular focusing on SMEs. Also, the digital skills are very important. I didn't mention skills in the green section, but I should have mentioned it because they are key. Research and innovation elements and cyber security. And in terms of reforms, of course, digitalization means modernization of public administrations and services, and we have several reforms in the plans. Also removing barriers to 5G, one of the measures in the Belgian plan, and then, as highlighted before, the measures linked to skill. And there are some measures with cross-border perspective linked to some of the projects, IPCIs, and so on. So on the social dimension, as I highlighted before, there is no, good morning, Mr. Dermin. There is no minimum threshold. However, the calculations we have done bring us to around 30% of the overall envelope, so around 140 billion euros devoted to this social dimension in the plans. So we see on the one side investments and reforms in education and skills, very important, from digital education, but to early school living prevention, affordable quality for early childhood education and care, inclusive and quality education, so in order to reinforce and make them education more resilient. We have also measures on health and long-term care. Modernizing hospital networks is a measure that appears in many of the plans, reorganizing health system, the institutionalization of the long-term care, and strengthening also primary care and prevention, and of course the digitalization of the health sector. We see also measures on social protection and inclusion. So in order to upgrade, expand, and improve access to social services, also reforms on minimum income, and reforms and investments on social housing and infrastructure. And concerning labor market and jobs area, we see labor market reforms in some of the plans, a lot of active labor market policies in the plan, more efficient public employment services. This is a measure in most of the plans, and also to the support of the most vulnerable, and also measures in order to improve gender balance in the workforce, and of course key for workers to have the opportunity to be upskilled and reskilled. In terms of this pillar on strengthening social economic resilience, so some of the measures are just highlighted on health systems, social safety net, public administration are key, but there are other reforms and investments in the plan, such as business environment, the sustainability of public finances, tax reforms, anti-money laundering, aggressive tax planning to address those country-specific recommendations, also reforms on labor market, on pensions, and as highlighted, education skills, and the equality in mainstreaming. So the RRF regulation was adopted in 2021, but since then many things have happened, and in particular the Russian aggression against Ukraine. And what the European Commission did was to present a proposal to amend the Recovery and Resilience Facility in order to address the new challenges emerging from the war, and in particular in the energy field. And this is what we call the REPowerEU. So the regulation was amended in order to entitle member states to additional grants, additional funding for measures linked to the REPowerEU objectives that I will explain in the next slide. And also what the regulation envisaged was to deal with implementation issues linked to objective circumstances. And of course, in 2021, we were not aware of what was coming in terms of the increase in prices of energy, construction material, also the problems on the supply, on key supply chains linked to the war. And of course, all these increases of prices, supply chain issues have led also to some cost increases and have a direct impact on the timetable for delivery of some of the measures. And the regulation includes a provision that allows member states to amend the plans to take this into consideration if they submit, of course, the evidence that there are objective circumstances. And we are in this process now, as highlighted in the previous slide, that member states are amending the plans. So concerning REPowerEU, so now the member states have an additional envelope for the 27 of 20 billion in grants, but they can also use the envelope of loans that is still available in the Recovery and Resilience Facility, and they can also transfer some funds from the Brexit Adjustment Reserve for the purpose of REPowerEU, and which is the objective of REPowerEU, so to further support the green transition and the transition towards the clean energy, strengthen also energy security of supply, and reduce the EU dependency on fossil fuels, and reduce also the energy demand. So member states, and Belgium is one of the countries who is working on this, are working now in order to present these amendments with reforms and investments, and also with the relevant milestones and targets. Process of the RRF. So now we are very close to the midterm. The 50% of the lifetime of the RRF will be early next year. Member states, as highlighted, are already presenting payment requests. Member states have as a deadline end of August to submit their request for remaining loans if they are willing to request loans, which for most of the member states have a preferential, well, a better interest rate than if the member state would go to the market by its own. And also member states are now working on these objective circumstances to amend some of the measures and include the REPowerEU chapter. And to highlight that all the measures in the plan have to be completed by the end of August 2026, because the European Commission is entitled to make payments only by the end of 2026, not beyond that. So this is an important element to take into consideration. In terms of the transparency towards citizens, people like you here in the audience, in terms of if you want to know where we are with implementation, so we have in the European Commission a website, the Recovery and Resilience Scoreboard also, in which you can see the progress of each member state on the implementation of the plans. We have added to this website a few months ago a new interactive map on projects, so all citizens can see the different member states, what type of projects are being financed by the Recovery and Resilience Facility. And of course, we are asking member states, and it's an obligation in the Recovery and Resilience Facility regulation, they have to communicate about the fact that the origin of the funding is Next Generation EU, from the EU. In addition, recently, the European Parliament and the Council have included in this REPowerEU amendment a provision that requests member states to establish a public portal containing data on the 100 final recipients receiving the highest amounts of RRF funding in the relevant member state. And this information, well, only at this stage, only 13 member states have published the information, but they are all working in order to do so. And last slide is the map. So you will see, if you go to our website, you see the map with all the different type of projects, also Belgium there, but there are many projects in all member states. And just here you have a final slide with the relevant websites where you can find information. So this is my overall presentation, and afterwards, of course, I'm open to reply to any question you might have. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this presentation. Now we will invite our second speaker, Mr. Darmin, to take the floor.
In the midst of a very complex political week, it's a bit of a break to be with you today. Anyway, I think the presentation of Ms. Fabregas was excellent to set the stage, and now we will talk about the concrete applications in Belgium throughout our plant, which is named Next Gen Belgium. Just a small note on what's the philosophy behind the plan, and you will see that our plan in Belgium is bigger than the amount of the funds provided by the EU, but it's a shared political belief in the government that if we are to be successful in the transition towards a green economy, of course, it's a question of believing in technology and keeping on investing in the next wave of technological revolution. Of course, it's a question of modifying profoundly our behaviors in terms of how we move, how we eat, how we consume. But it's also and foremost a question of infrastructure. And if we look throughout history, our country, Belgium, has been the core of past energetic revolution and energetic transition, transitioning to coal, transitioning to oil and gas in the 50s, the 60s. And if I look at what made us successful as a country in making the transition to a new energetic paradigm, it was precisely investing in infrastructure. And if you look at Belgium, we have we are one of the countries with the highest infrastructure network in the world, and this is the result of past energetic transition. I was born and raised in Wallonia. Wallonia is the theater of the first industrial revolution. How did we do the transition to coal? Infrastructure, building waterways, building the highest density network of railway in the world. In the aftermath of the Second World War, we transitioned to oil and gas. What did we do as a country? Massive investment in infrastructure. Building import infrastructure in the North Sea for oil and gas. Building highest density network of highways in the world. Building pipelines for gas to be able to fuel Germany, Netherlands, France. Building the highest density network for electric grid. Making a transition is a question of infrastructure. It's less sexy in the public debate to talk about infrastructure than talking about banning private jets or banning barbecues, but making a transition is about infrastructure. And we need to talk about infrastructure because when we were making transition in the past, maybe in the 19th century or in the aftermath of the Second World War, we were committing 6 to 7% of our GDP to infrastructure. If I look at the situation in Belgium over the past few years, we have been investing less than 3% in our public infrastructure over the last 4 decades. The red curve is the Belgian curve. You see public investment ranging from 2 to 2.5%. We are below the European average, which is ranging from 3 to 3.5%, which means that every year we have a net stock of public infrastructure which is becoming smaller and smaller. If we were to use a longer time series and go back in the 60s, in the 70s, what we would see is that the historical rate of investment in public infrastructure was around 4 to 6%. So that's the reason why why I was not so confident in the transition is that basically we have never talked so much, and the younger generation has never talked so much about making a transition to a low-carbon economy. We know that making a transition is a question of infrastructure, but collectively we have never committed such a little amount into our collective infrastructure. And that's precisely the answer we try to give with this government. In this government, we have an ambition to go to 4% of public investment rate in 2030, with an interim deadline of reaching 3.5% of public investment by the end of 2024. We were greatly helped by NextGen EU to provide us investment means, but the good news is that today, based on the numbers provided by your institution, the National Bank of Belgium, we can say that we are very much likely to reach this target of 3.5% by the end of 2024. When we talk about recovery and resilience investment plan in Belgium, actually we talk about 3 different pillars. We talk about a first pillar, which is, where was it? Yes. We talk about this pillar, which is precisely the pillar that Madame Fabregas talked about, which are national recovery and resilience plans, so the EU funds dedicated to Belgium. It was initially estimated to 5.9 billion. It has been revised downwards to 4.5 billion because economic parameters were better than forecasted for Belgium, and we raised it again using Brexit adjustment funds, using REPowerEU means, and adding a tranche of loans. So in total, we have 5.6 billion of financial means provided by the EU. The second pillar in the middle, it's basically every single government in this country, and we have many, 6, adding additional investment needs and topping up financial means provided by the EU. If I take the federal government, we added 1.6 billion of investment on top of financial means provided by the EU. And it's the same in Wallonia, it's the same in Flanders with the plan Vlaamse Veerkracht. It's also the same in Brussels, in the French-speaking community and the German-speaking community. The third pillar is also important because what we tried to maximize since day one is the multiplier effect on private investments, meaning that we forced the teams in every single government in Belgium to try to design projects in a collaborative way with the private sector, saying that every single public euro, may it be funded through federal or European means, should have the maximum leverage on private investments. So we have a lot of projects actually that are structured as public-private partnership. If I take one example, for example, you may know that we built an artificial island in the North Sea. It's a project funded through European money, 100 million investment, but we designed and structured the project as a public-private partnership, having industrial players, Belgian companies, multiplying the amount of investment in the project. We also support the SFPI FPIM, so the Sovereign Fund of Belgium, to play an active role in there. The SFPI has historically had, I would say, quite a passive role of managing state-owned enterprise. We try to stimulate them to play an active role in the economy, designing specific funds to intervene in projects and in companies that are aligned with the missions we try to reach. We have our plan, which is structured around 5 strategic axes. We have in our plan 170 investment projects and reform. It's very important to mention, as mentioned by Ms. Fabregas, that basically the investment plan of a member state is made of investment projects. You get money, but there is no free lunch. You don't get money for free because you need to pass reform. So the plan is, I would say, a coherent whole of a combination of investment projects and reform that we discuss jointly with the Commission. Each project is disaggregated into different milestones. If I take a construction project, for example, the island in the North Sea, we have a first milestone, which is the technical design. We have a second milestone, which is the permitting. The third milestone is the launch of the construction work. And the last milestone, which needs to be completed by the end of 2026, is the completion of the construction work. What are the 5 strategic axes that we have? We have the biggest one on environment, the transition. The second one on the digital transition. The third one on mobility. The fourth one on inclusion, with a focus on infrastructure investment in social inclusion. And the fourth one on productivity, which is the core asset for the competitiveness of Belgium. And actually, the funny thing, and I'm very happy to discuss with the Commission, because we have, and I must say in most member states it's the case, I was discussing with my colleagues, a communication issue on these next Gen Europe and the next Gen Belgium plan. I took a few press clips from the French-speaking press in Belgium, but it's the case in every single member state. Basically, every day we talk about European money being used for the good of the European citizen. It's quite amazing, but nobody knows it. And so we need to work on the narrative that actually Europe, with this kind of initiative, is supporting our member states in the good transition, in the good way for the transition. We have a plan with 5 strategic axes, as I mentioned before. In this representation, every bubble is an investment project in the plan. What you see is that the biggest category is sustainability, with as second mobility. What do we fund? If I look at the typology of projects, I would say that the vast majority of projects are infrastructure projects, with about 60% of the means dedicated to infrastructure projects. Then we have 15% in R&D, 25% on average on human capital training, and the rest on ICT. We have a plan in Belgium which is a rather green plan. We had a minimum threshold. We had a minimum threshold of 37% of the funds that needed to be dedicated to green projects, according to the taxonomy of the Commission. In Belgium, we reached 50% of the projects getting a green tag from the Commission. And I think that we are second to the finish in terms of the green component of our plan, and that was clearly the objective of the government, to seize this opportunity to give a boost to green infrastructure. If I look at each and every single of the axes, and sorry, I didn't take the time to translate in English, so you'll have it in French. But if I look at what concretely are we doing, and the figures you see on the slides are not, I would say, prospective figures, it's figures from earlier this month. So what are we doing? We are investing heavily in the renovation of existing buildings. Belgium as one of the least energy efficient housing stock in Europe, so we have ways to catch. We invest in emerging technologies to make sure that all companies in our country keep a hedge on emerging energy technology, may it be offshore wind, may it be hydrogen. We invest in protecting biodiversity with many different projects led by the regions. For example, this parcs nationaux en Wallonie, dans la vallée de la Semois, dans l'Entre-Sambre-et-Meuse, and with this project in Flanders around the Blue Deal and sustainable water management in Flanders. We invest heavily in mobility. What does it mean? Making the switch to green mobility may be significant investment in bike paths. For example, if some of you live in Vlaams-Brabant or Brabant Wallon, we are building corridors to enter Brussels very in a safe infrastructure from Waals-Brabant and Vlaams-Brabant. We invest heavily in waterways. For example, the Canal Albert between Liège and Anvers. We have feedback from many industrial companies in Antwerp that it's very hard to develop industrial activities due to limits in size and limits in traffic in Antwerp. So we invest heavily in the Canal Albert to make sure that we can use Liège as a base arrière for the port of Antwerp. We invest heavily in shared mobility with extension of network in Liège, in Charleroi, in Brussels, in Ghent, and to make sure that we provide credible alternatives to industrial cars. We dedicated a significant portion of the budget to investment in rail infrastructure with very different type of investment across the regions. For example, in Flanders, it's mostly extension of the network. In the port of Ghent, in the port of Antwerp. In Wallonia, it's mostly reinvestment in old, small lines that are increasingly used for individual mobility. We invest in digital with a focus on cyber security for the state administration services. We also invest together with telco companies on infrastructure. For example, fiber to home. We support investment projects on fiber deployment in Belgium, making sure that we will reach every single business, every single home in Belgium. Also, the connectivity for schools is important. On inclusion, we invest massively in supporting people with vulnerabilities. We renovate schools at a space that has never been met before. On productivity, which we call in French économie du futur. I don't know what, maybe because people don't understand what productivity means, but anyway. But we invest in people training, as mentioned by Ms. Fabregas, in supporting innovation, giving grants to companies and to research centers. And we support also some very innovative projects in circular economy, may it be, for example, on battery, may it be in the aeronautic industry. What are the key messages I want to leave you with? The first one is that after nearly 4 decades of decline in public investment, Belgium is finally reversing the trend. And we see an inflection point that we haven't seen in the last 4 decades, where the rate of public investment is finally going up. And I take it as a positive sign, because we know that making a transition, as I said in the introduction, is about building and renovating infrastructure. The second message is that, as mentioned by Ms. Fabregas, we are in the midst of the execution phase. So Belgium was very good, and it was a surprise in the design of the plan. We started late due to the formation of the government. So we started nearly 6 months after other member states in the drafting process of the plan. We started in October 2020, but we were among the first in 2021 to get our plan approved by the Commission. So now we are I would say it's a 5-year implementation period, and we are in the midst of it. And what we can say is that actually for the vast majority of the projects, around 75%, we have our milestones that are either reached or on track, which does not mean that we cannot improve, but it's very well on track. The third message is that actually we added a new chapter to the plan. And to do so, we used exactly the same structure, exactly the same reporting mechanism as the main plan. So for me, it's also a very strong signal for the future. We don't know what the future will be like. Maybe other extreme events, maybe other geostrategic crises. So we have implemented the administrative process together with the Commission to be able to get this kind of funding and implement investment projects. And the fourth aspect is that we have put a website, nextgenbelgium.be, that we update on a regular basis, and that gives you and gives to every single Belgian citizen full transparency on the projects, on the KPIs, on the milestones, on where we are, whether we are on track or we're late. And we do it, of course, because I think it's the way we should do politics in 2023, but we do it also to spare a lot of questions in the Parliament, and I must say it's quite effective to do so. Deep dive on the message. These are the numbers on public investment from the federal level. We see that we have a significant surge in the last few years. On the implementation, what we see is that in the last report to the Commission, you know it better than me, Ms. Fabregas, but we had 154 milestones under scrutiny, so 154 milestones that were reported to the Commission. 60% of them were reached, 22% were on track, and we were late for 18% of them. Of course, you can always look at the glass as half full of half empty, and the title you read in the press is already 20% of the project late. But honestly, if you look at the history of delivering infrastructure projects in Belgium, I'm quite relieved that we have 80% on track, but it does not mean that we do not focus our full attention. And I tell it with my friend from the Commission being here. We dedicate our full attention, of course, to the 20% for which we are late. And I must say that why are we late? I see mostly three reasons. The first one is unexpected technical complexity. If I take back the example of the offshore energy island, if we were listening to the engineers looking for funding, it was a very simple project to execute. The plans were already drafted, etc. But when they got the funding, they realized that actually it was slightly more complex than expected. So we have a few months delay in the technical studies. So that's the first reason, delays in the technical studies. More often, we have a second obstacle, which is permitting issues. It's a nightmare in 2023 to deploy large-scale infrastructure projects. And I must say, as a member of the government, that's something that deeply questioned myself. We know that realizing the transition will require massive investment in infrastructure, including large-scale infrastructure project, may it be transport infrastructure, may it be energy infrastructure. Think of Ventilus Boucle du Hainaut case. And we need to, I mean, if we want to keep on track with the objective that we have for decarbonation of the country, if we want to keep a sustainable industrial basis in this country, we need to solve those issues. I'm from the province of Hainaut, and the Boucle du Hainaut is absolutely needed if we want to keep heavy industry, for example, in the cement industry, dans l'industrie de la chaux, in the steel industry. If we don't do these investments in Boucle du Hainaut in the next 5 years, I mean, it's like committing suicide for those industrial players that are important to us in terms of socio-economic development and that have very important investment plan in greening their industrial processes. And that's a question for, I mean, relevant for Belgium, but also for other member states, is that actually 50 years ago when we were building highways, 100 years ago when we were building waterways, we were even at a stage of, I mean, with lower technical means, we were much more efficient at deploying infrastructure than we are now. I always take the example of the canal from Charleroi to Brussels. They built it in 3 years with des pioches et des pelles, hein, in 3 years. In Belgium, how much years did it take to build the RER from Brussels to Havre? And it's not a technical issue. It's an issue of, I mean, having an ability to impose the general interest on the will of individual citizens who are right to claim their right, but actually who prevent the country to work on very important challenges for the future. I don't know if it's Chatham House rule, but let's suppose it is. In terms of budget, we are also moving into full gear. And the first part of the graph is the PRR, so the European part of the funding. And what we see is that 80% of the budget have been committed, 44% have been disbursed. On the lower part, it's other investments, so mostly investments funded by the federal government, which are not attached with the 2026 execution deadline. That's why the percentages are slightly lower. On the additional chapter that we added to the plan, and we're going to submit it before the summer to the services of the Commission, we have added an additional chapter of around €1 billion, so 975 million euro, and it comes from 3 different envelopes. The first one is the Repower EU grants that were committed to Belgium. The second one is what we call the BAR, so Brexit Adjustment Reserve for 228 million. And the third envelope is coming from additional loans that we're going to contract with the EU. We split this envelope in between the different governments in Belgium with the same allocation key we used for the main RRF fund. And we decided not to design new projects, but mostly top up existing projects of the plan. So that's why the priorities that we have in this new envelope are fully aligned with the general philosophy of the plan. We invest in zero-emission mobility, in renewables, in emerging technologies, and in the renovation of existing buildings. As I said before, feel free to check this website. We try to be as pedagogic as possible, as transparent as we can on the different projects of the plan. We also try to spend a lot of time in schools, showing that actually the government and especially the EU is delivering concrete results for the citizens, that if we are able to renovate schools, if we are able to build the future of mobility, is thanks to financial means of the EU. And maybe to end, a few notes on how we see this entire process. So first bullet point, I think that NextGen EU has been a very powerful instrument to scale up investment for the twin green and digital transition. And honestly, I don't know if without the support of the Commission and the support of this instrument, we would have been able to have this inflection point in public investment. Yet, it's not enough. We know the IMF has computed it, think tank related to the Commission has computed it, that if we need to be credible with the Paris Agreement's target, minus 55% of GES by 2030, carbon neutrality in 2050. What we have done with NextGen EU, actually we should do it every year for a period of 10 years. So I have, as a member of the government, as the youngest member of the Belgian government, I have very mixed feelings. Because if I talk to the press, if I defend the work of the government in the parliament, I will always say, we had a target, we had an objective. We wanted to reach 3.5% by the end of the term. And it's a success because we are going to do what we said we would do, which is always a positive thing in politics. But if I speak as a citizen, if I speak as a father of 2 young girls, honestly, there is not much to be proud of. Because what we do, we should, in 5 years, we should do it every year for a period of 10 years. Making a transition, ensuring that our planet Earth has a sustainable future is a question of investing in infrastructure. If I look at the composition of CO2 emissions of Belgium, 20% is buildings. We can solve this. It's a question of building massive investment programs like we've done in the 40s, in the 60s, in the 50s, to build passive housing for everyone. 30% is coming from the industry. And 80% from those 30% is concentrated in 20 industrial sites in Belgium. A big cemetery, steel making, oil and gas cluster in Antwerp. We have the technologies right now to support the private sector to decarbonize fully the industrial activities. Do we want to do it? The third sector is mobility. Mobility, it's also a question of investment. Of course, you can bash the automobilists, and you can ban cars to enter cities. But it's a question of investment. As long as you won't be able to provide an alternative of shared mobility as efficient as is the car, you won't solve the issue. And there also we have the solution. So that's the main message I have for you, and I try to also give to the Commission every time I can, is we have the solutions. It's a question in the next 5 years to commit the funding to these investment projects. And so yes, I hope, and actually we already have seen this with Repower EU, that it's only the beginning. And that what our kids will remember from the COVID-19 crisis, of course, it's a major pandemic with deep impact on our collective health, but it's also a turning point in European history, where for the first time, the EU has raised its own funding and has given the means to the member state to invest in the transition. And my bet, but in politics I've learned that you should never do bets, is that we will use this mechanism again and again. Because what will happen in the next 10 years, every year, we will see floods, we will see droughts, we will see wildfires, and every year the consequences of global warming will be more obvious. And we will realize, maybe too late, that the only way we can do to fight it and to adapt to the new reality is to invest in infrastructure. And we will realize that in the monetary union, member states don't have the fiscal capacity to invest to the extent they're required to do, and so they will rely on a new supranational entity, which is the EU, and I hope it's the way it's going to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Damen, for your presentation. And now I will let the public, the audience, ask questions. So feel free to ask the question. My colleagues are here to give you the microphone.
Thank you to both speakers for the introduction and for the presentations. I thought I had a question for Ms. Fabregas, but in the end, Mr. Derwin also touched upon it. So you are giving loans and grants to member states, but this is money that you don't have. So you are collecting it through funding by European end investors, issuing bonds on 3 months to 30 years. Is it not a dangerous policy to start a European sovereign debt at your level next to all the national debts that we already have?
Yeah, so I will start, and afterwards Mr. Dermin will continue, because actually his remarks justify the need. So yes, absolutely, it's the first time that the European Commission is issuing such a big, well, receive a mandate from the member states, because just to be said, all the member states, the 27 member states, agreed that the European Commission could issue this debt for those specific investments. And as you have seen, I highlighted clearly green transition, key, digital transition, key, but also all the other policy pillars. So it was considered that it was necessary to give a push to all these investments. And as you know, the European Commission, we don't have money. So we only have the money coming from the member states, the own resources that we call, and the budget, the normal budget. But this situation of the pandemic, and also the fact that we really need to move forward, in particular on the climate transition, but on the other transitions, require a huge amount of funding that was not available, and that's the reason why it was considered that if the European Union, European Commission was issuing this debt, would have better market conditions for some member states than if they would do it individually. In addition, talking about individual member states, it's clear that the European Union is based on the single market. We have a market of 27 member states. And it was not possible, in accordance with the EU treaty, to create divergence between the EU member states in the way out from the pandemic. Some member states, given the situation they had when the pandemic started, had a better fiscal situation that was allowing them to provide more public funding to investments, but this was at odds with the state aid rules with the single market, and therefore that's the reason why all the member states agreed to move forward together, the 27, and the reason why the program is also called Next Generation EU is because, on the one hand, the program, the facility is asking member states to introduce structural reforms and structural investments with a long-lasting impact for the next generation. But it's also clear that the next generations, we are talking about 30-year bonds, will have to pay back this. And what the plans intend to do is that each member state will be in a better position. Not only the recovery, but the resilience. The resilience is the key of the element in order to, of the plans of the facility, in order to allow for this reimbursement of the debt. But these investments are absolutely necessary, and the presentation by Mr. Dermin shows the needs also in this country, in Belgium, but you can replicate this in all the other member states.
Well, you have a story out there that the moment that we live in is can be compared to the Hamiltonian period in the US, where before the presidency of Hamilton, the US were mostly dominated by individual states. And then during the presidency of Hamilton, to cope with the consequences of the war, they raised money at the federal level to support individual states. And actually, at a point in time, they had to pay back the creditors, so they raised taxes at the federal level, and this is usually considered as the moment of birth of the United States of America. And you have a story out there, if you read to political comments, that says basically, is NextGen EU the Hamiltonian moment for Europe? And in 30 years, when we will need to pay back, will this lead to fiscal consolidation in the EU? Hence the birth of the EU as a supranational entity. Honestly, I don't know. It's a very deep political question, and I think only we need a few years to assess the story. What's true for sure, and I'm in a very good position to confirm it, is that the EU and the Commission has acquired a completely different position, a completely different power with this mechanism. I explain myself, and my neighbor is likely to laugh a bit. But for long, the EU, the Commission has been, you won't like the comparison, I warn you, but has been a dog that was barking, but its ability to bite was limited. Now, with this mechanism, we have a dog that keeps on barking, that's for sure, but its ability to bite has drastically increased. I mean, if I look at the pension story in Belgium that I'm sure you all follow, that's it. I mean, we have had in our country-specific recommendation for how long? 5 years, 10 years, the pension issue, and every 6 months we were saying to the Commission, yes, we should work on it, we are very committed to have a reform, it's going to come in the next 6 months. Now, with this mechanism, the Commission has acquired means to bite and to say, look, if you don't do it, it's your own choice. You are fully sovereign on pension policy, but you're not getting the money to invest. And people don't realize that actually that's the biggest political consequence of this NextGen EU mechanism, is that actually the ability to act of the Commission has been multiplied drastically. So I'm not sure that we are in this Hamiltonian moment. It's a very deep political question on the construction of the EU. But what's for sure, and I experience it every day quite painfully, is that actually the EU has acquired new ways to interact directly with member states. And it's, I mean, without any political judgments, it's an evolution in the relationship in between member states and the Commission, which is positive in some way, which raises some question, including on democratic governance of EU institutions, but it's something to work on for the next years.
We have another question there. Yes, sir.
Stasinopoulos, formerly with the European Commission. The coronavirus pandemic certainly has affected very much the world and Europe, and especially the European Union. And I'd like to touch one aspect of that, the value chains, the distribution systems which have been affected, and we see now still the recovery of Europe has been affected because many of those value chains have moved out to Southeast Asia. Certainly, value chains are driven by multinationals greatly, but many medium to small size European enterprises have been affected. I'm wondering what the Resilience Fund, what are the options, what are the policy tools that for example, Belgium has to affect so the supply chains to become more efficient for Europe, to decide whether some industry has to go out or to go in, And we see the United States adopted the in approach with measures which are not really in compliance with international regulations. I'm wondering, specifically for Belgium actually, what are the instruments are available in Belgium and within the community? Are there tax incentives, subsidies, or local content requirements to help and help the industry to somehow promote more the recovery?
Yes, it's a very relevant question, and indeed the COVID-19 crisis, in conjunction actually with the crisis in Ukraine, has radically changed the way we see industrial policy in Europe. I'm quite new into politics, but my impression is that industrial policy has long been nearly a dirty word in the corridors of the Commission. And today, we have a Commissioner, Thierry Breton, who is actually in the pure tradition Colbertiste, leading quite an ambitious industrial strategy for Europe. The question is, how do you do that, keeping the fundamental principles of the EU based on competition and equal market access? A very interesting instrument that has been proposed by the Commission and that we are using intensively in Belgium is called IPCEI, Important Project of Common European Interest. I always have issue with acronyms from the Commission. I mean, why do you call something IPCEI? Nobody understands it. Anyway, the idea is that actually in specific industries, if you can justify that there is a market failure, you can have derogation on state aid to support specific industrial projects. So, for example, I'm coordinating an IPCEI on biopharma together with France. And so we justified that for specific products in the biopharmaceutical industry, we have market failures that justify that we directly support industrial companies in improving their industrial capabilities. I must say, we cannot not do it, especially given what other parts of the world are doing, especially the US. But it's not easy to manage, especially in the culture of the Commission, and especially as a small country like Belgium, because as a small country very open to the world, we tend to benefit a lot from competition rules. And if we start to see member states supporting directly their industry without any control or playing with the rules, it will be always at the expense of small countries. Because if you don't have competition rules, you start to see that size do matter. And we see that in many investment projects that actually, yes, as a small country, Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, you're enabled to compete with Germany and France when it comes to supporting your industry. So it's a tricky question because we need to do it versus other parts of the world, but we need to be very cautious how we justify those exemptions.
If I may add, because the issue is very important, and the European Commission last week, in the framework of the midterm review of the multi-annual financial framework, has adopted some proposals in order to create a platform with additional funding, but also with existing pooling, with the pooling of existing EU programs, such as InvestEU or structural funds and other programs, to facilitate for deep tech, clean tech, biotechnology, and digital facilitate some of the investments. So it's called, the platform is called STEP. And well, some people say it's the precursor of what could become the sovereignty fund that you might have heard about. And the idea is to create a sovereignty seal for some of these key investments in Europe to facilitate that they receive funding. And here a key instrument is InvestEU that is being used already by many member states through the EIB to get loans or guarantees, because talking to some of the small startups in green tech technologies, they say that actually they do not need grants, subsidies. What they need is warranties that help them to have access to the credits, the bank credits, and be able to invest. No? So at European level, as mentioned by Mr. Dermine, there are some initiatives in order to help all these companies and to make sure that European companies have a say also not only in Europe but at global level.
Okay, all the numbers that you have been mentioning are very impressive. The number of topics is very impressive. What I would have liked to hear from you is, are all the projects current at a European level? When I see what Belgium is doing, they have concentrated on some specific issues. The question is, the common people have only one question: what is in it for me? When they listen to the numbers, when they listen to the project, they don't find any answer to their question, which is a very, very old question asked by every people all over the world. Then, how are you make sure that all the projects that you finance are current, are concentrated? There is an agreement on what are the 5 most important projects for Europe to change the what is in it for me in what is in it for us.
I think Ms. Fabregas, you can answer first the question. And then,
The question you ask, I think it should be the #1 question on the table of the commissioners. That's the issue of Europe. And that's the issue of how do you tell the European projects. And that's true. I mean, I'm an economist by training, and I present the Next-Gen Belgium plan as an economist. I'm a fan of technology. I could talk for hours about the infrastructure of carbon capture that we're building in Belgium, about the development we have positioning Belgium as the leader in the hydrogen industry. But honestly, nobody cares. Nobody cares. It's very important for the future, but nobody cares. You know that when we talk about numbers, just to give you an idea, I realized that I read a study yesterday and ça a anéanti mes espoirs complets sur ma façon de faire de la politique. Only 20% in the population knows in between 1 million and 1 billion what's the ratio. Okay? So the fact that 1,000 million is 1 billion, only 20% of the population knows it. Beyond 500,000 euro, it's a lot of money. 2, only 10% of the population can read a 2-axis graph. And so, we may laugh and find it funny, but with 40% of the population voting for non-democratic parties at the extreme right or extreme left, because we have been collectively the policy elite of this country, of this continent, unable to tell political stories, it's frightening. It's frightening. And when we were, building the European institutions, we were not talking about numbers and conditionality and pushing for 1.2% reform of the pension rather than 0.8. We were telling a story about peace, what's in it for me, we're going to rebuild Europe, we're going to... And what you're telling about the narrative, what's in it for us, what binds us together beyond a few numbers, etc., is exactly what should be the #1 priority of Europe. Because honestly, as a politician, and I'm educated in the US, I'm super pro-European, etc., but as a politician, what's the easiest narrative for me to build that people understand is a narrative against the EU. If I go in the press today and I tell them, we have money for the project, it's good, but the EU is pushing us to make a pension reform that you don't like and savings on the reform, etc., that's a very good and very powerful narrative. 10 times easier than building the opposite narrative. And so this question, and you know, when you ask your question, I saw a lot of faces smiling. Ah, what a soft question. But this soft question is the most important question that we can ask ourselves. And the future of, the basics of democracy are relying upon it.
If I may add from more technical perspective, that you see the name of the Recovery Resilience Facility, it's very technical, recovery, resilience, very abstract. But then this fits within what we call Next Generation EU. And it is there where the European Commission wanted to give a message, it's for the future. We are in a very bad situation, pandemic, we are not reaching our level towards the climate transition, digital transformation is moving forward. We really need to do a lot. And this a lot, we'll do it and we are going to do it for the next generation. And is this for us, is for the next generation. And of course, in each of the plans, in each member state, there are measures that has an impact to each individual person, sometimes without noticing, others noticing clear because people get in primo some subsidies for the renovation of their own house or to buy an electric vehicle. But others are a better education system, better judicial system. This has a positive impact on all of us. And is this precisely the communication that Mr. Dermine was talking about during his presentation, and I tried to mention also, the communication is very important. We want that people know what is being done with these EU funds. And just to highlight that, as here in Belgium, in many other member states have used the national funds also to go beyond the amounts that were coming from the EU. But at the end of the day, it's an issue about doing, of course. It's very important to do, but it's very important to communicate about what is being done from the perspective of the citizens. Because until now, we were communicating a lot very abstract concepts, and we need, and in the European Commission, we are making an effort to communicate from the perspective of the citizens, for citizens really to understand what is being done for each of us. I'm a citizen also, so I'm working for our well-being as a civil servant in the European Commission. But it's the communication that is key.
Just one comment. It's about communication, but not only. It's also a question of what's the right narrative, but also a question of how much do we invest? Belgium is 20 billion investment plan. Wow, it's huge. It's never seen before. But what's 20 billion, actually? I mean, Belgium GDP is, what, 500 billion? So basically, we're going to invest, what, 4% of Belgium additional, it's a 4% GDP investment planned across 5 years for the biggest threat that humanity has ever faced, which is basically the destruction of the planet. I mean, that's the question we need to ask ourselves. It's a question of putting the right financial means. When we were rebuilding Europe after the Second World War, debt level in the UK, in France, was above 300% of GDP. I don't say that we should go to that level, but why did we go to that level and creditors did accept it? Because we accepted the idea that we needed to rebuild the world into a new society. And it's not with 4% of GDP investment across 5 years that you're going to rebuild the world. And honestly, that's the question we should have collectively. It's, if we agree that we need to save the planet, how do we commit and how do we build market mechanism to invest significantly more than what we do?
Except if there is a lady also asking a question, I will give her the hand. But if there is no lady, I will first of all compliment BFF for organizing this fantastic talk. You're a dream team to me. I've been involved in a lot of events at European level and at Belgian level. Compliments for both of you. My question is very direct. I'm representing here Mrs. de Los Angeles Garcia, the CEO of Dignity Service. We have private funding partners engaging in Africa, and we have the approval to engage also for development projects in Europe as from 1st of July. What is the protocol to follow, Thomas, or at European level, to be involved as a private partner in your mission vision? Thank you.
What services are you exactly delivering? I didn't get...
We have funding capacity to fund private equity and private-public partnership projects.
In infrastructure or?
Yes, also. Bankable business cases, happy to fund. So what is the protocol for a new platform to engage with public representatives at Belgian level and or through them at European level? Thank you.
Well, just to give you a few ideas, but then I have members of my cabinet up there, so you can for sure have a technical discussion. But when we design new projects, which we're going to do for the next envelope, so the Repower EU, we try, if possible, to structure ex ante project finance structure in which we can involve private partners. So there we can discuss on specific projects. I would say for the first and the second pillar of my plan. There is also the third pillar, which is privately funded projects, either through projects that are structured in a way which is open to fully private funding. And there we have a few projects that are looking for funding that we can present you. Or an alternative is that you can invest in funds that we are structuring with SFPI, the Sovereign Fund of Belgium, which are looking always for new backers in the fund. That's also another way to intervene indirectly. But there is Pierre-Emmanuel over there who will be happy to prolong the discussion.
So at European level, for concerning investments in the recovery and resilience plans, You can check on our website, at the European Commission website on Recovery and Resilience Facility, where we have links to the national websites, and then for the investments at national level, you will have the contact point there.
I've sent 25 mails over the last 3 months, no answer from anybody from the European ecosystem. And I sent a mail to Mr. Bermin the day after, his 2 people replied to me. How can you help me with a single point of contact? I like your answer, I understand it's what you're doing, but I want a single point of contact.
At European level, but because one thing is the investments at national level, and this is this. No, actually, as I said, last week we published this proposal called STEP, and we want to create a single point of contact, a single portal, one-stop shop for all the investors to be able to see what type of investments will be available. But this is a proposal that now is going to be discussed in the European Parliament and the Council, so we have not yet set up this one-stop shop. From the European Commission, we would like this to happen very soon, but it depends on the other institutions. So, but in any case, I will give you my business card and we can discuss.
Thank you. We have time for one last question, so I think, sir.
I wondered if Madame Fabregas might say something about how big an impediment the Belgian pension reform is to Belgium receiving further funds under the Next Gen program. And also, could you give us some quantitative idea of how big the rise in EU borrowing costs has been since the ECB started raising interest rates in the middle of last year?
So, concerning Belgium and all member states, so they have to present a payment request when they have implemented the elements of what we call an installment, that has, the Council has decided what milestones and targets have to be implemented within each of these installments. So the first step of a pension reform is in the first installment for Belgium, and therefore it is for the Belgian authorities to decide when they will be submitting this payment request. So it's in the hands of the Belgian authorities. It's not in the hands of the Commission. And to highlight that, of course, in the Council implementing decisions, there were indicative timelines by which member states would be presenting their payment requests, but these were indicative. And to tell you the truth, from the 27 member states, none has complied with all these indicative timelines. There are member states that are more advanced than Belgium in terms of presenting payment requests, but is a prerogative of the member state to decide when to present the payment request to the Commission. Concerning borrowing costs, I don't have the information, but I can, if you give me your contact details, I can find it for you, because we published this information on the European Commission website of the Director General for Budget, which is the one in charge of the issuance. Thank you.
Yeah. I will turn upside down a question that was asked before. In fact, how can you make the citizen aware that what is good for all of us is so good for him? And it's about communication. I'm still amazed and very sad to see that no public works last so long. You spoke about the RER, effectivement, le réseau éternellement retardé, comme on dit maintenant en Belgique. You see also le tram à Liège qui prend du retard aussi. In the past, Belgium built metro underground in the 19th century in a few years all around the world. Now we take decades to make things. But something about communication about EU. When I went in Belfast decades ago, every place where at least a few pounds was spent by European Union, you could see big posters said, this work is funded by European Union. I don't see any place in Belgium where this kind of thing said that these works are funded partly by European Union. So in fact, we speak about a lot of money, and I'm convinced that everything is useful, but how many schools have a big board on the entrance said, renovation of this school is funded partly by European Union. I don't know. And that's something to see that this is where your money goes, and that's useful. But in fact, it's figures, but only figures, but nothing seen, visible, really visible, that this is what money from European Union in Next Gen EU was spent for.
Short reply on the execution of work. It's a big issue. What we do is what I'm trying to do with my colleagues, Annelies Verlinden, Ministre de l'Intérieur, is to design some kind of fast administrative track for, I would say, priority issues for the green transition. So on est dans un état de droit, donc on ne peut pas réduire les voies de recours au Conseil d'État des citoyens individuels, ce serait contraire à nos valeurs. But for some projects, are we allowed to have shorter delays or shorter few means of going to the Conseil d'État? That's something we investigate, and that's absolutely needed. More profoundly, it deeply questions the relationship between the general interest and individual priorities in society. You know, the RER, how do you call it? I liked it. Le réseau éternellement retardé. We have data, I'm a bit of a data geek, on which are the neighborhoods in which the complaints at the Conseil d'État were introduced. And there is a positive correlation between the share of votes for the Green Party and the amount of recours au Conseil d'État contre le RER. Watermal-Bafort, for example. So it gives an idea of the individual tensions we all have. We all are for the transition, but it should not hurt our own individual comfort. Bon, that being said, on the communication part, it's also a tricky one. So we are obliged, and we do it, we're not obliged, we do it because we believe it's good to communicate for the EU. Every single time you see a chantier, and today in Belgium we have 982 chantiers that are open and financed by European means, to see the logo of the European funds. What I tried to do in the beginning of the term is to say, exactly like you, it's amazing to show to every single citizen what the EU is doing. We're going to do a big promotion campaign. It wasn't that expensive. Honestly, it's only a few tens of thousands euro. And what we did is we put big billboards, for example, on the Bourse. The Bourse in Brussels is being renovated with public means. We put a few big bâches, etc. What was the result of it? I got 23 questions in the parliament on it. It's not the role of a minister and of a public budget to pay for advertisement campaign. And so I'm not doing it anymore, because I'm not going to take a political risk to have the opposition telling me that I'm doing communication and not effective work on it. And there also, I mean, the citizens telling you that you should more communicate about the projects will be the same citizens that will actually advocate against you because you pay public money to do communication work. So it's a bit, I mean, it's not as obvious as it may be.